Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa mawalah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome into another lecture of the Armor program. So we're continuing our journey to answer the question, is there a creator? And so far we've been looking at the atheistic view. So far what we got is that in the atheistic view, there is no soul, there is no free will, there is no objective morality, and societies need to come up with their own moral standards. Also, we learned that we are the product of evolution. Now, despite me not liking all those ideas, but we'll give it the benefit of the doubt. After all, it could be true. So let's see what's the evidence, or what the people who call for it, why do they call for this? Okay, so first we will listen to Prof. Dawkins talking to Brother Hamza in an interview when he was coming out from, I think it was the Atheist annual conference or something like that. So let's see what he's got to say.
So you want to communicate atheism to the world, and we want to have a connection with you as a human being.
I want to communicate truth.
Good.
Do you believe in evolution?
Do I believe in evolution?
Yes.
I believe that I don't have adequate information to even make that judgment.
Well, that's very sensible. Now, let me give you some adequate information.
Oh, please do so.
Okay. The evidence for evolution is absolutely solid. It's as strong as the evidence that the planets orbit. You do believe the planets orbit the sun, do you? Yeah.
Yes, I did science as a bachelor's.
Well, you did science, so why don't you know about evolution?
Because it was psychology, that's why.
Well, psychology ought to include evolution because the human mind, the human brain, is an evolved organ. Okay, the evidence for evolution, although it happened a long time in the past, so you can't actually see it happening, or most of the time you can't. Nevertheless, I use the analogy of a detective coming on the scene of a crime after the crime's been committed, so you can't actually see it happen. But what you see is all the evidence, all the clues, all the fingerprints, all the footprints and everything else. And that adds up massively, more strongly than any court of law.
I agree with this,
yeah.
But the only contention...
Okay, so what I've got from what Prof. Dawkins said is that first he's trying to convey the truth. The second thing is that the evidence for the evolution is as strong as the evidence that the planets orbits the sun, which is, now that's a fact nowadays with the satellites and the telescopes. The third thing is that his methodology is like a detective who goes to the crime scene, looks for the clues and looks for the evidence so that he can come up with his conclusions. So now let's ask him. So within this truth and detective and the solid evidence for evolution, how did life start?
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, and how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No, nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe.
I'm standing here with Richard Dawkins' explanation for how life got here. Aliens. If you remember the movie Expelled, the end of the movie, he was interviewed by Ben Stein. Now, Richard Dawkins, as you know, is the top, most well-known atheist in the world. And when Stein asked him, how did life begin here on Earth? Dawkins suggested aliens. Now, why did he say that? Because he knows that the genetic code in particular, the genome, and even the simplest of life is thousands of volumes long. There's no way natural forces could have created that. Of course, it's a problem for Dawkins to suggest an alien. Why? Because it just puts the question off one more step. Who created the alien? An alien is somebody inside the universe. God, of course, is somebody outside the universe who is uncreated, but an alien is created inside the universe. So why would Dawkins suggest an alien? I don't know, I can only speculate, but one of my speculations is this. You see, an alien does not bring moral accountability with him, but God does. Perhaps Dawkins just does not want to bow his knee to a creator. I don't know. But if he would follow the evidence where it leads, it wouldn't lead to an alien, it would lead to the uncreated creator who created this universe and created Richard Dawkins, and me and you as well.
Okay, so Prof. Dawkins thinks that life started and was seeded on this planet by aliens. Now, the problem is that doesn't answer the question, because who created the alien, as Frank Turek said, who's the man in the video at the end. Where did the aliens come from? They evolved through Darwinian process. Yeah, but that doesn't answer the question. Where did they come from after that? Now, an alien seems to be a common belief among atheists, like we saw with my friend yesterday. So, aliens, why do they say that aliens did it? Why can't they say that it just happened? It's because with the discovery of the genes, it became impossible for anyone to say that it just happened. Because what we know now is that the genes, it's a code. It's a code made of like written letters, which if you put in on paper, it will take multiple volumes, like books and volumes, for a single gene, the information that's on the gene. So, as they say, the code needs a coder. Okay, any information that we find needs a mind behind it. It's if you see a writing on the beach, you will never assume a meaningful writing, even any writing, if it's not meaningful. You will never assume that the waves did it. You will always think that there is a mind that did those letters and wrote those words. So the same thing now with the gene. Someone must have done it. Now, obviously they're saying it's aliens. Okay. Now, for people who claim to only believe in science, I want to know what science lays behind them saying that it's aliens. Is that science? That sounds like faith to me. Now, that's why Frank Turek, as I said, the man at the end of the movie or the film, he wrote a book called "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist," because you will see that to be an atheist, you need huge faith, blind faith that's got no basis whatsoever to be an atheist, as slowly you will see inshallah ta'ala. So now the first thing is we've got aliens. Also, the truth. What I heard in that video, perhaps, maybe, we don't know. So that's the truth that they have. Perhaps and maybe and we don't know. So just back to Frank Turek. So this is, as I told you, at this part of the road, we walk together with the Christians and the Jews. But the Jews, obviously, there's not many Jews, so you don't find lots of Jews. It's mostly through the Christian work. So we walk together and then we split later on. When I see the work of those guys, deep inside and sincerely, I wish if they become Muslims. And we will talk, as I said, more about that later on once we get to say, yes, there is a creator, after we look at all the evidence and we come to the conclusion that there's no way that there's no creator. So now let's examine the evolution theory, because Prof. Dawkins said that it's a fact. Now let's see if this theory has problems. First, if it's a fact like that, then all scientists should agree on it. Let's see if that's the case.
First question, Darwin versus Einstein. Einstein publishes the special theory of relativity in 1905, and in the 12-ish decades since that publication, one observation after another has tended to confirm his work. Just a decade ago, scientists found clocks on satellites in elliptical orbits kept time just about as Einstein would have predicted. Over time, to put it crudely, Einstein has become easier and easier to believe. Darwin publishes On the Origin of the Species in 1859. Briefly, as was true of Einstein, also of Darwin, has he become easier and easier to believe? Michael?
No, the opposite.
The opposite. John?
The exact opposite.
Stephen?
Theory has been progressively disconfirmed by multiple observations in multiple subdisciplines of biology.
All right, all three of you come out swinging.
So, as you see, those scientists believe that the evolution theory is actually failing day by day. Now, we will go through some of the problems that this theory has. The first one is the fossil record. Now, when Darwin, more than 170 years ago, proposed the theory, he said we should find lots of intermediary products, lots of intermediary skeletons or fossil in the fossil record. We should find plenty, countless of those intermediary species that will, obviously, because you go evolution, then failed, or through natural selection, many of those species will die. And then we should find plenty of them in the fossil record. Now, let's see if that's the case.
The fossil record. The Cambrian, how's it pronounced?
Either way, yeah.
All right. The Cambrian or the Cambrian explosion. What was it, and why is it a problem for Darwin?
It was a problem that Darwin himself knew about in 1859. The Cambrian explosion refers to an event in the history of life in which the major groups of animal forms, the new body plans that are exemplified by the largest categories of different types of animals, appear very abruptly in the fossil record with no discernible connection to ancestral precursors or intermediates in the lower Precambrian strata. And this pattern of abrupt appearance of the major groups of organisms, of biological or morphological innovation, as it's called, recurs up and down the sedimentary rock column. The first winged insects, the first dinosaurs, the first birds, the first mammals, the first flowering plants. There are multiple instances of this type of abrupt appearance. And so the fossil record looks very different than Darwin anticipated that it would look. He depicted the history of life as a great branching tree where the forms of life we see today emerged gradually from one or very few simple forms at the base of the tree, at the trunk of the tree. But instead what we see, it looks more like a lawn or perhaps an orchard of separate trees where the major groups of organisms appear abruptly without connections to those ancestral precursor forms.
So the Cambrian explosion was the first that got noticed. As you say, Darwin himself noticed that this was a problem, but this is from my reading, add to it or correct me. As I've got it, the record shows one abrupt meaning a few million years, but in the geologic time, that's the blink of an eye, one abrupt event after another. Photosynthesis, just all of a sudden it's there. The Avalon explosion, the great Ordovician biodiversification event, whatever that may have been, the Silurian Devonian terrestrial explosion. Fish appear, birds appear, dinosaurs appear, mammals appear. Okay, so the obvious objection to this is, well, we've only really been digging since about Darwin's time. The Earth is big, geologic time is essentially endless, there are fossils there, we just haven't found the intermediate forms.
Right, that's an objection to the claims about fossil discontinuity that's known as the artifact hypothesis. This idea is that the missing ancestral forms are an artifact either of incomplete sampling or incomplete preservation.
Right.
The Cambrian explosion itself presents a very nice test of that artifact hypothesis. The claim with respect to sampling is that we haven't looked long enough. Well, we're 160 years on now from the Cambrian, or from the publication of The Origin of Species. And the Cambrian explosion, from our point of view, has become even more explosive. There are more new forms of life, more new animal forms known now in that Cambrian explosion event than there were in Darwin's time. And yet, with that passage of time, we've found no more of the intermediates. So there are more new forms still all of which are still lacking intermediate
So
forms.
instead of our findings regressing to some sort of Darwinian mean, they're departing from Darwin more and more and more.
Right.
Okay, so the fossil record does not support the theory. Now there's another problem here called the time problem. Let's have a look at that.
To understand how the waiting times problem applies to the origin of humans, we first have to ask, how long has it been since living apes and humans shared a common ancestor? Apes and humans shared a common ancestor around 6 to 8 million years ago. Now, that organism was obviously not a living ape, but most evolutionary theorists and paleoanthropologists would say that it was something of an ape-like creature that walked on all fours and had many ape-like traits. So we know that in order to fulfill the waiting times problem, we have to be able to evolve from that organism to a modern human in 6 to 8 million years. Well, what needs to happen? You need to redesign the spine. You need to redesign the pelvis so that the legs come out at a different angle. You need to redesign the skull so that it sits on top of the spine, so the face is flattened, so the jaws are restructured, and our brain size also needs to expand greatly. There are quite a few different body plan changes that need to happen in that 6 to 8 million year time period to go from this ape-like common ancestor of apes and humans to modern humans. So is it possible to do that from population genetics? Well, there was actually a paper in the journal Genetics a few years back that asked this exact question. What they found is that to evolve a trait that requires only 2 mutations before giving an advantage in a human-like population would take over 200 million years, which is far more time than that 6 to 8 million year period that's allowed by the fossil record. So yes, the waiting time issue is a huge problem for the origin and the evolution of humans from this common ancestor we supposedly shared with apes.
Okay, so there was not enough time for apes to turn into people. Now there are problems in the concept as well of the theory, which we have Prof. B here now, who is a professor in biochemistry. He's telling us about a concept that he discovered or that he looked at. It's called the irreducible complexity, which Darwin himself said, if you can find something like that, then this will destroy my whole argument. This will destroy the whole theory. Okay, let's see what this irreducible complexity is.
The bacterial flagellum was one of the central examples of irreducible complexity Behe highlighted in his book.
If you take away the propeller, if you take away the motor, if you take away the clamps that hold it onto the cell's membrane, take away any of a number of different parts, it's not that the flagellum is going to spin half as fast as it used to, or it's broken. It doesn't work at all. It's like taking the propeller off of an outboard motor on your boat and wondering how far now you can go in the water. You can't go anywhere. So that's a problem for Darwin's theory, because Darwin's theory says that things evolve by working a little bit, maybe not very well, but a little bit, and then a mutation, a change comes along that helps it work a little bit better, and that helps the organism survive and have more offspring, and so then another change comes along, and another, and it gradually builds up to the final structure. Well, that might work for some things, but it doesn't work for systems that are irreducibly complex, things like the bacterial flagellum. Because, well, if you wanted to build an outboard motor for a boat, what would you start with? Would you start with, say, just an iron rod that, in the future would attach a motor to the propeller? Well, what's that going to do? It's not going to do anything. Would you start with just a propeller? Well, that's not going to do anything. It's not attached to anything. Would you start with just the motor? Well, that's not going to propel you anywhere. So with irreducibly complex systems like the flagellum, Darwin's idea is dead in the water, like a boat with an outboard motor that doesn't work.
Natural selection selects or favors in variations that confer a functional advantage on a system. Many of the simpler versions that you could imagine of the bacterial flagellar motor perform no function at all. So if you imagine trying to build a flagellar motor, adding parts one by one until you finally get to the complete system, you're going to encounter configurations of parts that confer no function, in which the motor simply will not work, at which point the evolutionary process will terminate. It will cease to continue because the system conferring no function will not be preserved and passed on to the next generation.
Okay, so suddenly the strong, solid evidence for evolution are not strong anymore. You can see there are many, many problems with that theory. I'm really trying to make some sense of the atheistic view. Cannot explain how life started. Tells us that we progressed from lower species, which, by the way, Darwin himself said, I don't know how to trust my brain that actually evolved from lower species. I don't know how to trust any ideas that come to this mind or to this brain that evolved from lower species. So they're not even sure about their own ideas. Anyway, so now we have that, no explanation of how life started, evolution that's full of holes, no objective morality, no soul, where just chemicals come. That's what we get from them. That's why I told you that atheism is a parasite. It cannot survive on its own because it's got nothing. Nothing. It only survives by criticizing religion. So for those common lay atheists that know nothing about atheism, the ones that you see in the street, at work, at school, let's try to challenge their belief. We shouldn't be in the defensive position all the time, because what they say is, are you people who believe in God or Creator, let's say at this stage, you need to come up with evidence. Well, that's not true. Atheism is a belief, and you can see how much faith there should be in atheism for people to be an atheist. Okay, so tell me, okay, if you don't like what I'm saying, just tell me, where did we come from? All right, how did life start? All those sorts of questions. Where do we get morality from? How can you say that this thing is wrong? Okay, and use, as I said, use all those arguments and the evidence that we had so far, okay, to argue against them. And as I said, later on, if they have some doubts after that, or if they're really seeking the truth, then we can present the evidence that we will see in the next lecture, inshallah ta'ala. So till next time, stay safe, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.